The night was thick with silence, until the sharp crack of a slammed door tore through it. Emily's chest tightened as she stumbled backward, heart pounding in her ears. Words echoed from behind the door like venom. "You'll never be enough." The insult struck harder than any fist, dragging her back to every moment she had been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the cool wall, searching for breath. Her voice trembled in the empty hall. Emily said, "No, not this time." The words were faint but alive, trembling yet steady. For the first time, defiance sparked inside her. Though fear churned in her gut, another voice rose louder within. "Stand, even if you tremble." In that moment, she understood the betrayal before her was not the end, but the spark of a final chapter she had never dared to begin. Emily walked out of the narrow hallway and into the night air, her breaths sharp in the chill. The city lights stretched above her like indifferent stars, casting her shadow long on the concrete. She whispered, "I've been silent too long." Her feet carried her forward, each step shaking yet deliberate. Memories of every quiet dismissal, every clipped comment, every time she'd been told she wasn't enough filled her mind. Each memory stung, but instead of dragging her down, they built into something stronger. "If pain is all I've ever been given," Emily said softly, "then pain will be the fire that makes me rise." Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the name of her colleague flashing on the screen. For a moment, Emily thought of ignoring it, but then answered. His voice came blunt, laced with sarcasm. "So, did you finally walk away?" She tightened her jaw, breathing slow. "I didn't walk away. I was pushed out." Silence hummed on the line before his voice softened. "And now?" Emily looked at the city skyline ahead, sharp and endless. "Now," she said, "I start again. This time I speak louder, even if my voice shakes." Emily reached a small bench by the side of the road and sat heavily, hands pressed to her knees. The night seemed endless, but her mind raced. She whispered, "Every door slammed, every voice raised against me, every shadow I lived under. None of it will own me anymore." Her breath fogged in the cold as she looked upward, where a single star pierced the heavy clouds. Emily said, "I've been overlooked, silenced, and doubted. But I am still here, and I am not done." She rose again, legs heavy but steady, and began walking forward. Every step echoed against the pavement, a rhythm of defiance. Her voice was soft but firm. Emily said, "This is the start of my final chapter." The words cut through the empty night, shaping themselves into a promise. For the first time, the silence around her felt less like emptiness and more like possibility. Each breath steadied, each stride stronger, as if the ground beneath her finally knew her weight. Emily slowed her pace as she reached the familiar corner diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly above her, the same hum that had carried her through long shifts years ago, when she was barely scraping by. She pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window, staring at her own reflection, framed by dim red light. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I thought I'd left this girl behind. The one who worked until her body ached, who smiled even when no one saw her." Her eyes watered, but her jaw tightened. But she's still here. She's always been here. A fragment of herself that she once despised now felt like the root of her strength. Maybe starting over isn't failure. Maybe starting over is proof that I survived. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she answered immediately. David's voice was rough, sardonic as always. "You sound like hell." Emily let out a weak laugh, breath catching in her throat. "Maybe I do. Maybe that's what honesty sounds like." He paused before replying. "Or maybe that's what it sounds like when someone finally gets tired of carrying everyone else's weight." Emily leaned against the diner wall, the cold pressing through her blazer. "I've carried so much, David. Every insult, every silence, every slammed door. And I kept telling myself that was strength." His voice cut through, blunt but steady. "That was survival, Emily. Strength is when you stop pretending it doesn't hurt and decide to stand anyway." She closed her eyes as tears welled, whispering, Then maybe tonight is the first time I've actually been strong. Emily walked down the block as David's voice stayed in her ear. Do you know what I see when I look at you? He asked. Emily let out a hollow laugh. Someone who's been beaten down so many times she forgot how to get up. His tone sharpened, cutting her self-doubt. No, I see someone who kept going when anyone else would stay down. I see someone who's been surviving in silence, because she didn't realize she had the right to roar. Emily's throat tightened, her voice breaking. And if I roar, what if no one listens? David didn't hesitate. Then at least you'll finally hear yourself. And that's the only voice that matters. She slowed her pace, his words striking deeper than she wanted to admit. She stopped beneath a lamppost, breath fogging in the cold air. You make it sound so simple, she whispered. David chuckled softly. It is simple. It's just not easy. The truth rarely is. Emily lifted her eyes toward the weak glow above her. I've spent my whole life waiting for someone to tell me I mattered, for someone to choose me. Her voice trembled as she pressed her hand against her chest. But maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the one who has to choose me. David's tone softened. There's the voice I've been waiting to hear. Don't lose it. Emily swallowed hard, her tears spilling freely now, but her spine straightened as she whispered again, firmer this time. I choose me. When she reached her building, Emily stood at the bottom of the stairwell, staring up at the cracked railing and dim hallway light. Every night before, she had climbed those stairs carrying shame like a backpack full of bricks. Tonight, she felt something different stirring in her chest, not ease but the possibility of release. She whispered, I am not just the sum of what I've survived. I am the proof of it. David's voice echoed in her memory even after the call had ended. You're not here to survive. You're here to stand. She set her hand firmly on the railing and began to climb, each step slow but deliberate. By the time she reached her door, her whisper had become a vow. I will not vanish, not anymore. The office hummed with quiet hostility as Emily stepped inside. Her shoes clicked against the tile, each sound sharpened the heavy silence. Colleagues glanced at her, eyes darting away quickly, mouths pressed into thin lines. She felt the sting of their whispers, even before they began. Someone muttered near the copier, she shouldn't even be here after what happened. Another voice replied with a low laugh, she'll burn out soon enough. The words were quiet but poisoned, sharp enough to pierce the fragile armor she had built overnight. Emily set her bag on her desk, hands shaking as she powered on her laptop. She whispered under her breath, don't fold, don't shrink. David, seated across the aisle, looked up briefly, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable but grounding. He said, ignore the noise, it's the only thing they're good at. His words hit her chest like a lifeline. Later, in the meeting room, the tension thickened. Emily sat near the corner of the long table, a notebook open, her pen tapping nervously. Her supervisor strode in with the air of command, papers tucked under his arm. His words sliced across the room, we'll keep this efficient. No unnecessary interruptions. The jab landed squarely on her, and a ripple of laughter spread among her colleagues. Emily's chest tightened as her pen froze above the page. A voice inside her urged, say nothing. Stay invisible. Stay safe. But another voice rose louder. Not this time. She raised her chin, steadying her voice. I have something to add. The room fell silent, then broke into scoffs. Her supervisor leaned forward, lips curled into a smirk. Emily, perhaps you'd be more comfortable listening today. She clenched her fists under the table, nails biting into her palms, her body trembling with suppressed fury. After the meeting, David caught her in the hallway, his voice blunt. You rattled them. Emily shook her head, anger and shame colliding in her chest. They laughed at me, David, like my words meant nothing, like I was nothing. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her back against the wall, hands curling into fists at her sides. David's eyes narrowed, his tone cutting but not unkind. Of course they laughed. That's what people do when they're afraid. You didn't fail in there. You scared them. Emily's breathing quickened, tears threatening at the edges of her eyes. I've spent my whole life trying to be small enough not to make enemies, and now they see me as one anyway. David leaned closer, his voice dropping to a sharp whisper. Then stop fighting to be small, let them see you. That's the only way they'll ever stop pretending you don't exist. That night, Emily sat alone at her kitchen table, papers strewn like wreckage across the wood. Bills, old evaluations, notes scrawled in her own handwriting. Every page a reminder of how long she had been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. She pressed her palms into her eyes until stars danced behind her lids. "How many times do I have to break and rebuild?" she whispered, her voice raw. Silence pressed in, but the quiet wasn't empty. It was suffocating, carrying the echo of her family's doubts. She'll never make it. She doesn't belong there. Her hands trembled as she pulled the papers closer. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, her chest resisted them, her breath pushing harder. "No, no, I'm still here. If I was as weak as they think, I wouldn't be." She slammed her fist against the table, the sound loud enough to steady her heartbeat. Sleep never came. At dawn, Emily stepped outside into the brittle cold, her blazer pulled tight against her body. The city stirred around her, trains rumbling, horns echoing faintly, the first rush of footsteps on sidewalks. She whispered into the empty air, "The world will not hand me a place. I'll carve one." Her legs trembled with fatigue, but her steps quickened, each stride a rebellion. She heard David's words echo, "You're not here to survive. You're here to stand." She repeated them out loud, voice low but firm. "Then I will stand, even if the ground shakes beneath me." She walked faster, her body weary but her spirit unyielding. For the first time, her whisper felt heavier than the city's noise, like a vow carved into stone. Emily sat in the break room, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug, when she overheard her supervisor's voice drifting through the half-open door. "She was never meant to be here. The only reason she lasted this long was because we needed someone to take the blows." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Her stomach tightened as bile rose in her throat. She pressed her hand against the table, breathing hard. Betrayal had always whispered in shadows, but now it had spoken loudly, leaving no room for doubt. She whispered to herself, "They never believed in me. They only believed I could be their shield." The truth cut deep, but within the sting came clarity. She wasn't weak. They were terrified of her strength. Later, David found her in the stairwell, eyes fixed on the floor. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded, jaw clenched. "All this time I thought it was me. My failures, my weakness. But I was their scapegoat, their convenient excuse." David's voice sharpened, not with anger at her but at the truth. "They feared you because you never gave them the obedience they wanted. That's why they tried to bury you under their weight." Emily's eyes lifted, burning through her tears. "Then, I've been carrying shame that was never mine." The words struck her chest like lightning, shaking her but also lighting a fire she could no longer ignore. That evening at home, Emily searched through old files and emails, her fingers trembling as she uncovered messages she had long ignored, evidence of projects she had been credited for but never recognized, ideas she had planted but others claimed as theirs. Each discovery was a stab of memory, but also a piece of proof. She whispered, "They built their ladders on my silence." Her reflection in the laptop screen stared back at her, weary but alive, eyes glinting with anger and clarity. She straightened in her chair. "This isn't failure. This is theft. And I refuse to keep carrying their lies as my truth." Her phone buzzed again, David's name glowing. She answered, voice sharp but steady. "I found proof." David paused before replying. "Proof changes everything, but only if you use it." Emily stood, pacing the room, holding the phone tight. "What?" "I'm tired of waiting for permission. I'm tired of swallowing my own voice." She stopped, facing the window where the city glowed under night. "If they built their success on my silence, then I will break that silence. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now." Her chest rose, breath heavy but strong, as if the very air was pushing her forward. For the first time, Emily didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of her pain alone. The betrayal had not destroyed her, it had uncovered the truth. She pressed her palm flat against her chest, whispering, "All this time, I thought I was broken, but I was never broken. I was buried." The words steadied her heart, filled her lungs with fire. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked toward the door, each step echoing louder than the last. The final veil had fallen, and in its place was only raw clarity. Her story wasn't ending here. It was just beginning to break free. The boardroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Emily sat near the end of the long polished table, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her supervisor spoke with confidence, taking credit for yet another idea Emily had carried alone for months. She felt the sting of every stolen word, every erased contribution. David's eyes met hers from across the room, steady, urging her forward. Her pulse thundered, but she rose to her feet. The room fell into silence, chairs creaking as heads turned. Emily's voice trembled but carried, "That project wasn't yours, it was mine. And I have the proof." The words hung heavy, sharp as glass, impossible to ignore. Her supervisor sneered, his voice dripping with dismissal. "Sit down, Emily, don't embarrass yourself." Heat flushed her cheeks. But she stayed standing, chin lifted higher. "No, I won't sit. I won't shrink for you anymore." She spread the documents across the table, her fingers steady now. Gasps rippled through the room as signatures, dates, and emails painted a truth too sharp to deny. "You used me," Emily said, her voice fierce now. "You stole my work. But today you don't get to hide behind my silence." For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt unshakable. The supervisor lunged for words, scrambling to defend himself, but his voice cracked under the weight of evidence. "She's twisting things." Emily's heart pounded, but she leaned forward, gaze unflinching. "No, I've been twisted long enough. You broke me down piece by piece, but I refuse to stay broken." Her words rang like steel, echoing in the stunned silence. David smirked faintly from the side, arms crossed, his eyes gleaming with pride. Emily continued, softer but unyielding. "This isn't just about me. It's about every voice you tried to erase. We are done being erased." The air in the room shifted. For the first time, Emily's truth carried more weight than his lies. The silence that followed felt endless, broken only by the creak of a chair as one colleague spoke softly. "She is right," another voice added. "We've all seen it." The supervisor's face drained of color as the tide shifted, whispers no longer against Emily but against him. Emily's chest rose and fell, each breath steadier, each heartbeat louder. She whispered to herself, "This is the moment." Then louder to the room, "I will not be invisible again. Not here. Not anywhere." Her voice shook with force, steady as thunder, reverberating through every corner. It was not just defiance, it was liberation. Emily felt the ground beneath her steady for the first time. The boardroom was no longer a cage. It was the place she claimed her voice. She gathered the papers slowly, her hands no longer trembling. Her supervisor slumped into his chair, unable to speak. David's eyes met hers, a silent nod carrying more than words ever could. Emily turned to the room, voice calm now, but every word like a blade. "I will not vanish. I will not bend. This is my final chapter, and I am writing it myself." The silence that followed was not empty. It was respect. The boardroom emptied slowly, colleagues avoiding Emily's gaze, not with dismissal but with something new, respect, even unease. She stood alone at the table, fingertips brushing the polished surface. The weight that once pressed her shoulders down was gone, replaced by a quiet strength rising from her chest. She whispered to herself, "I spoke, I stood, and I am still standing." For a moment, silence surrounded her, not heavy this time but calm, almost sacred. David lingered near the doorway, his voice firm but softened. "That was the loudest silence I've ever heard, Emily, and it belonged to you." She allowed herself the smallest smile, fragile yet real, before gathering her things. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual noise, but Emily walked as though she carried her own weather, steady, unshaken. She whispered, "I thought my voice would break me, but it built me instead." Cars passed, horns blared, strangers brushed past, yet the chaos felt smaller than her steady breath. She pulled her blazer tighter, remembering every slammed door, every cruel word, every night she believed she wasn't enough. Now those memories felt like ashes. She whispered again, stronger this time. "I am not their shadow. I am my own fire." Her steps rang against the pavement like a drumbeat of resilience. That evening, Emily returned to her apartment. She paused at the door, her hand resting against the worn wood. Once, this threshold had felt like a cage, a place to collapse in silence, hidden from a world that refused to hear her. Now it felt different, less like confinement and more like foundation. She whispered, "This is where I fell, and this is where I rose." Inside, the clutter of papers and reminders of her struggles still lay scattered, but they no longer looked like chains. They looked like markers of every step she had endured to reach this moment. She walked through the room with quiet reverence, as though entering her own sanctuary. David called later that night, his tone blunt but softer than ever before. "You changed the script today." Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. "I didn't just change it. I wrote it for the first time." David chuckled faintly. "You always had the pen, you just never realized it." Emily let out a long breath, eyes steady on the faint outline of her face. "Then I'll never let it go again." For the first time, the reflection staring back at her wasn't a stranger or a shadow. It was her, whole, scarred, resilient, alive. Before sleep came, Emily wrote a single line on a scrap of paper and pinned it above her desk. "I am not broken. I am becoming." She leaned back, whispering the words to herself like a prayer. Her chest rose with deep breath, no longer shallow with fear but steady with resolve. The city hummed outside, life moving as always, but for Emily, everything had shifted. She no longer needed permission. She no longer needed approval. The silence that once haunted her had been turned into her strength. And with that strength, she closed her eyes, ready for what the next chapter would demand. Morning broke gently, sunlight spilling across Emily's apartment like a quiet blessing. She stood at the window, fingers curled loosely around the sill, watching the city wake. Once, this sight had filled her with dread, another day to endure, another battle to lose quietly. Now it looked different. It looked possible. She whispered, "Every ending they forced on me was only a beginning they didn't see coming." Her chest lifted as she breathed deeply, the cool air rushing through the half-open pane. Behind her, the note she had written glowed faintly in lamplight. "I am not broken. I am becoming." Her phone buzzed, another message waiting, but she didn't rush to answer. For once, the world could wait. She spoke softly into the morning air. "My silence was never weakness. It was patience. And patience gave me strength." The words settled into the room, grounding her more than any reply ever could. The city outside hummed with noise, horns, footsteps, voices, but none of it overshadowed the sound of her own steady breath. She turned slightly, catching her reflection in the glass, and for the first time she smiled without hesitation. Later that morning, Emily walked into the office building again, but this time her steps echoed differently. The marble lobby that once swallowed her whole now seemed smaller, the weight of its walls unable to press her down. People glanced at her, whispers following, but she didn't shrink. She whispered under her breath, "Let them watch. I'm not here to disappear. I'm here to stand." Her stride lengthened, blazer brushing against her arms, chin lifted as the elevators opened before her. The sound of her heels against the floor felt less like noise, more like a declaration. David was waiting by the elevator, arms crossed, but his expression softer than usual. "You look different," he said. Emily smirked faintly, pressing the elevator button. "I feel different." His brow lifted. "What changed?" She met his gaze firmly. Nothing and everything. I stopped waiting for them to see me. I started seeing myself. For once, David had no sarcasm to offer, only a quiet nod of agreement. Emily stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding closed as if sealing one story behind her while opening another ahead. The elevator rose, the hum steady, her reflection cast across its mirrored wall. Emily spoke quietly to herself, each word a vow carved in steel. I will not vanish. I will not bend. I am not broken. I am becoming. The doors opened to the top floor, and sunlight poured in through high windows, wrapping her in gold. She stepped forward, not with trembling fear, but with unshaken resolve. This was not the end of her story. This was her final chapter, and it was only just beginning.